First, let's have a look at all the control types available in TouchOSC, and then I will talk about some problems with some of these control types, explain to you how I solved them. And then I'm going to talk about the TouchDesigner side. I created a small toolbox with 3 components that make the whole mapping and presetting process way easier. And then in the end, I'm going to walk you through the process of creating an interface. If you're not interested in this first part of the video, I recommend just jumping to the interface creation chapter. Control types. We have buttons. We have momentary and toggle buttons. Momentary is just like a pulse, and the toggle is something you can turn on and off. The next thing is a radio button, which is an array of exclusive buttons. So only one of these is active at a time. Then we have our fader. This is our radial. A radial is like a potentiometer. It's a circular slider that's locked in a range. The next thing is our encoder. Encoder is like a radio encoder, so it's endless. And there's one little problem with the encoder. It jumps from 0.99 to 0. So whenever we cross this point up here, we jump back to 0. Then we have the radar control. The radar control is like a mix of an encoder and a fader. We can turn it circular, and we can also move it from the middle to the outside. In the encoder part, again, we have the problem that it's going to jump from 0.9 to 0. And the radar also has the problem that it sends 2 messages at once. When this happens inside of TouchDesigner, it's going to be split up into 2 messages. Here in the example, it's shown with the XY pad, but the concept is the same. XY pad is this here, but let's stay with the radar for a second. So what we want is we want to send 2 messages, like we see here. We want to send one for X and one for Y. The XY pad is like 2 faders combined. Same problem. It sends 1 message with 2 arguments, but we want 2 messages with 1 argument. And the thing here is we can manually change the addresses for radar and XY pads, but to do that by hand can lead to errors pretty fast. Next up, we have the grid. The grid is a collection of controls, but usually I like to use the grid for presets, for calling presets. By default, the grid is gonna create 1 message for every button inside the grid. But what we want is we want 1 grid message, and we want that grid to send the value of the button we press. So when I click this button down here, I want to send grid value 4. Up here we can see the default address, which is the name of the index, and then it's gonna send either 1 or 0. But to understand why this is a problem, we first need to talk about another problem. When you start your interface in TouchOSC, it's not pinging all the controls by default to TouchDesigner. So you would need to press every control once for it to show up in your OC in TouchDesigner. And to solve this, I wrote a script that iterates through all the controls in your interface and pings them to TouchDesigner. But because of the way the grid is implemented in TouchOSC, it stops at the grid element and it's not gonna ping any of the elements in the grid. So when we start the interface and we don't change the address of our grid, we would only have the first control element in that grid showing up. And the same problem is occurring for the radar and the XY pad because our ping script doesn't know that TouchOSC has 2 arguments which are being split up. Layouting in TouchOSC. I won't go too much into detail. Let's just say it's not very intuitive. There are a lot of basic things which do not work. For example, what we can see here, when we group 2 elements and then resize the group, we are not resizing the elements within the group. To change the size of elements inside the group, you would need to ungroup, resize all controls, and then regroup them. Let's recap on the problems we have inside TouchOSC. We have layouting, which can be frustrating. We need to change addresses for our pinging script to work, and we have the clipping of encoders. With encoders, I mean the encoder and the radar, which is a combination of a fader and an encoder. To solve all of these problems, I wrote a little program which is responsible for changing all the addresses and pasting all the scripts we need for our pinging script and the encoder clipping to work properly. Before we start mapping our controls to our network, we need to talk about presets. One of the main reasons I'm so into creating my interfaces for my TouchDesigner patches is I can control as many parameters as my fingers can touch at once. And it gives me this ability to really dive deep into states I would never find if I would only use a mouse and keyboard. So when you find these states that otherwise would be hidden to you, you want a way to save these. And to do that, we want to have a preset engine that can save and recall states from your network. All our values coming from TouchOSC are in a range from 0 to 1, and probably every single parameter inside your network will have its unique range. If I want TouchDesigner to send the current state of the network back to my interface after calling a preset, then I need to think about having two ranges, my normalized 0 to 1 range from my interface, and then the parameter specific range of my network. Solve all of these problems, I created these three scripts within TouchDesigner. We have the remapper, the presetter, and the OC out. They all work together, but are created in a way that you can be as modular as you want. So the presetter is saving and calling states of your network. Then the remapper is connected to bases in our network and has the purpose of handling the remapping of ranges, OC out, which deals with updating the controls in our interface after calling a preset. This whole infrastructure consists of 5 parts. We have on TouchOSC side a layout script, which can help us layouting, naming, creating labels. Then we have the TouchOSC editor, which deals with modifying addresses and pasting scripts we need during runtime. On TouchDesigner side, we have the presetter, remapper, and OC out, which make sure our interface is always displaying the current state of our network and make sure we can save and modify presets, as well as not having to map every single parameter by hand while making sure the ranges are exactly what we need them to be. The first thing we want to do is go to the GitHub repo and download everything as a zip. Once you downloaded the zip and unpacked it on your computer, you have the TouchOSC editor for Windows and Mac. We have the Tox toolbox, and up here we have the script. So the only things we actually need is the setup script, this Tox, and the program. But before we start working with them, let's first have a look at our network we want to create an interface for. Drag the toolbox Tox into your network, and let's have a look inside. I'll just cut these here and paste them into my network. But before I go deeper into these, we first need to prepare the network. And to do that, we need to understand how the remapper is working. The remapper has a target op, and this target op needs to be a base with custom parameters. And then we have our input shop, which usually is our presetter, but also could be our OC in. And we select a range of channels from this input shop. What the remapper then is doing is it's exporting all the channels chronologically into our specified base. And our ping script in TouchOSC will ping our controls from left to right and top to bottom. That means we need to think about which controls we want to spatially group inside our interface. And then we need to order our custom parameters inside the base in the same order they appear in our interface. To understand this better, let's have a look at what we can actually do in this network. We have our noise texture, where we could play with the period, exponent, amplitude. Then here we have a speed parameter, and we can zoom in as well as control our camera position, and we could also change the orientation of our torus. Also, we could change the height of our camera. This leaves us with two areas in our network. We have the noise area. Let's collapse this. And then we have our camera area and our rendering area. So let's also collapse this. Next step is jumping in here and mapping all the parameters we want to control. So we customize parent component and we think about what we actually need. We want our speed, and then we want, let's say, period, exponent, amplitude, and offset. For the speed, I'm going to use a parameter chop. So here I'm going to create the speed component and then select it here. For our noise, I can just drag these over and make them masters. This has the nice effect that we directly get the range that TouchDesigner by default puts in for these values. So we are done here for now. Let's go to our camera settings and let's go over this chronologically. So we want our position, we wanted our POV as zoom. Then for the transform, we want actually only our X and Y. When I drag this over here and we open the parameters here, we can see we have 3 values, but we only want 2. So let's delete this. And we're gonna create a float and we're gonna call the first one tilde_x and tilde_y. Then we can open the parameters again. And now we bind these here. And the last parameter we're interested in here is our height. We're going to do the same thing again because this is again a 3-value parameter, but we only want to control 1. Now we created all our custom parameters. The next step is thinking about which parameters should be controlled by what kind of control and how should our layout look like. I recommend making a quick sketch first. I took the time to draw this properly, but usually I would just do this by hand and with a piece of paper and just roughly sketch out what should be where, which controls I want to use. Let's go over this. Presets, I want to use a grid and I need the extra button to save or overwrite presets. Then over here, this area is our camera control. We have the tilt. I'm using an XY pad, so I can tilt it up, down, left, right. I have my camera position, which I can rotate, circular, and I want the rotation to be not limited. So having this on the Y value of our radar, which is the encoder, lets us enable to endlessly rotate the camera in any direction without any clipping. And then the FOV, our zoom in this case, is on the x-axis. So the further I go out with this value, the closer we zoom in. And then for height, I just went with a fader. Down here, period, I also don't want to have a specific range, so I'm using an encoder. And the same thing for speed. I want these 2 values to be open-ended in both directions. And then the other noise parameters, I just picked some faders. I added this dotted line here to symbolize that I want the tilt and speed parameters be spatially independent from the other parameters in the space, because I'm not sure right now if I want to have them where they are right now. Maybe I want to move them around. And we remember our ping script reads our values from left to right and top to bottom. So how do I achieve having these split up? We go into our component again, and the only thing we have to do is to create a new page. And now I'm just dragging my speed over here. And when we look at the remapper, we see we have a target page. So we can have multiple remappers for one base, and we can tell each remapper which page inside the base it should target. Let's go over here. And let's create a new page for tilt. And let's drag these over. Now is also the time to define our parameter ranges. For our period and speed, we have the encoders, so we don't need a fixed range. And our exponent, amplitude, and offset can just stay in the default range. But for our camera settings, I want to create some custom parameter ranges. So our tilt, should go from, let's say, minus 30 degrees to 30 degrees, and our height should go from -5 to 5. Let's have a last look if our parameters are all in the same order. Tilt is split up, so it doesn't matter, but we can see FOV comes before position because I want position, like the rotation, to be controlled with the Y value. So I just need to drag FOV up here. Height works for us. And here we have period, exponent, amplitude, offset, speed is split up again. So now we're ready to build the interface. I opened up a fresh project in TouchOSC, and the first thing I want to do is go into my Lua scripts and open the setup script. And let's just copy this over here at root. I want to change the dimensions to be landscape. And now it's time to add our controls. I'm going to start with some faders, and I remember I need 4 faders, so I just copy and I paste 3 times. The height fader was over here. These 3 faders are still stacked, but I'm going to leave them for now. The next thing I'm going to add is 2 encoders. Then we need a grid. Let's have a 3x3 grid, so I have the ability to save up to 9 presets, and for presets I want to use my buttons. I want my buttons to be toggles, and I want them to be exclusive. For adding labels later on with the setup script, you need the grid to have equal rows and columns. Otherwise, it's going to get confused. If you don't want labels for this, just ignore this. And I want to add a button to save new presets. And lastly, our XY pad and the radar. Let's roughly place this to have the right dimensions. These can be a little bit bigger. And I'm going to group these just for layouting purposes for now. And when I just click somewhere, nothing is selected. I'm at root level, and here I have my root level script, and I'm just going to run it. And here we have some settings. The only one we are interested in right now is this padding here. So let's increase it. Also running the script on group controls is going to rename them. We have to quickly launch the interface, and now we can see it's taking the group name as prefix and then adding an abbreviation of the controller type. So for example, we could use that to add a noise prefix to all of these. Let's call this one noise here. And we're going to run the script again. Quickly refresh it. And now we can see we have these names here. Next thing I want to do is add labels and a unified style. So first I'm going to lay out this a little bit nicer. And now I'm going to add a stack of labels because unfortunately, alone with this script, we cannot create labels. We can just name them and move them and change their style. So we will need a stack of labels. What I like to do is just hold Control C and then V down and just hold it for a few seconds. We have 75 labels now. That's going to be more than enough. And now I want to create a master style. To do that, we need an element on root level. So if this master style is going to be in a group, it's not working. And we're adding the tag master here. And I just want this to be white. I want the corners to be full outline, and I don't want to have a grid color. There is also this check mark for grid, but because grids are handled differently for certain controls, you need to handle the grid either with alpha or leave it as it is. And I want this to be a little more round. Now let's run the script again. We can see some things here. First, let's delete these labels. We are also creating a label for every group, but we can turn that off inside our script here under create group labels. And in this case, I don't want this to happen. So let's add false. And another thing is that our master style fader here doesn't have a label. It actually has a label, but the label is below it. And that's because we added this control after we added our labels. So you always need to make sure you add labels in the last step. Also now we can see the naming convention. We have the prefix of our group and then the controller type, and they are numbered after controller type. So here we have encoder 1, encoder 2, and fader 1, 2, and 3. The idea of renaming the control this way is so we can filter them later in the remapper properly to find the controls we need for the specific base. If you actually want proper labels that tell you what the controls are doing, I recommend naming the controls by hand. So let's do this. I'm just gonna ungroup these. I will quickly delete all labels, and then we're gonna set up the names by hand. This was our period, but it's important you keep a prefix again so you can filter the controls later in TouchDesigner to assign the right parameters to the right controls. I'm gonna leave the noise prefix and call this period. This was our exponent, then our amplitude, and our offset. This is gonna be our speed. But now we remember we have speed in a different page, so probably we don't want speed to show up when we filter with the prefix noise. I'm just gonna call this speed. Let's add some labels again and run our script. I'm gonna delete all excess labels here. I don't need the save and preset label, but the rest looks fine to me. So now I'm gonna delete our style master, and now we're done with the layout part. When you start the program, probably you will get this message. This is because I didn't buy a verification license. If you don't trust me, I have the source code here where you can read through the source code and you compile it yourself. Otherwise, click on more info and run anyway. I'm going to select the file. I saved our interface here as example interface. So I'm opening this, I'm running, and we're done. Now we're back in TouchOSC, and I opened the lockdown here. Let's see if everything works. With our presets, tilt, you also can see we get 2 messages for tilt. We have our cam height, the save button, and then period, the other noise, parameters, and speed. Let's check if our clipping works. Our next step is to actually connect our interface with TouchOSC. We click this connection icon up here, we make sure we go to OSC, and we open our OSC in TouchDesigner. And here we can select our current IP, which should be the same as in host. This will look exactly the same when you open it in your control device, like your tablet or your smartphone. And you need to make sure that send port here is equal to a network port in your OC in, and then in the OC out, we have also a port, and this port needs to be the receive port. So TouchOSC is sending on port 777 and receiving on port 888. And here in OC out, we have localhost, because right now I'm running TouchOSC and TouchDesigner both on my computer. But when you run TouchOSC on your control device, you will have a different IP, which you need to enter here in the OC out. And to find that out, click here, and then here, usually starting with 192, this is the IP address of your control device. Now, as everything is running, when I start this, we should have all our parameters in here. Let's check again. We have presets, we have tilt X and Y, we have cam with continuous values, then we have cam height, save, noise period. Okay, perfect, everything is working. Our next step, in case you want to use a preset system, would be connecting our OC into our presetter. You can either do this via wire or you just drag it here into the input shop. And now you have 2 options, channel pattern and exclude pattern. Channel pattern lets us select a range of parameters. For example, we only want our noise parameters inside our presets. The other option you have is using the exclude pattern. So I don't want to have my preset and the save parameter inside the preset itself, because that would create a self-dependent loop. So here under exclude pattern, I'm gonna enter presets and save. And now they're excluded. Of course, you could also combine these two parameters. For example, you want to save all noise parameters except the amplitude. And now let's look at the other parameters here. Row select. This is the preset we're calling. So we want to connect this here, and then right preset is our save. So we connect this here. Now what OC out is doing is it's automatically grabbing the trigger parameter from the presetter, and it's also grabbing the fade time. So whenever we call a new preset, the OC out will send information back to our interface for the duration of our fade time. We have different fade methods, and we can modify the fade time. Now with our presetter and the OC out setup, let's move on to the remapper. When we look here, these are our noise parameters. So in our remapper, first we need to define an input chop, which usually is our presetter. You could also have multiple presetters, but every presetter needs its own OC out given you want to update your interface. Then we need a target operator, which is our base here. And we only want to export to the custom page. So here I have to enter custom. Now let's call the right parameters, which are our noise parameters. And now when we look at our base, we are exporting to the right page. And when we compare the values, we can also see that we are exporting the right channels to the parameters. Now over here, we're still missing our speed. I'm gonna copy paste this. And what's happening by default is it's deactivating our export table. This is to avoid that we export into the exact same parameters from two jobs, because that would lead to problems. So before you activate this, make sure you change the parameters first. So now we want to export to speed. And we also want to get our speed parameter. So nothing is happening, but now it's activated. Let's do the same for our camera settings. So this time we're going to base 2 and we want to export to the Xform page. Let's activate our export. And now the last thing missing is our tilt. And as we can see, our values are mapped to the ranges we predefined in the custom parameters. Now let's deactivate our viewer, bring this one up, and it's time to check if our system is working. Okay, let's save some presets. Our presets are working. One thing we can also do is, for example, I don't like the position here, but I like the rest. Then I could just adjust these two sliders and hit save again. And then I saved all the other settings in the preset and only adjusted the two I didn't like. To end this video, I want to show you a more advanced example. This was my original setup for interface. And this is how it looks when utilizing the toolbox and the workflow I just explained. I separated the network into the different areas of purpose. For example, here I have my movie input. Here I have the core network of the whole setup. And then here I have my post-processing. And I have my pages. And then these are my remapper scripts. Over here I have my OC out, presetter, OC in. And this is how my interface looks like.